Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode. We really appreciate you joining us. This podcast really shows us how we can all learn, live, and thrive off of each other. By sharing our knowledge through our conversations, we will impart some knowledge whilst learning ourselves how to progress even further. Here is your host.
This is The Backstory with Omobola Stephen. It's a balanced, objective, unbiased and disruptive conversation on government and politics. We shine more light on what has not worked and what would make it work. And now, to the finest, personable and engaging host extraordinaire, Omobola Stephen. Tune in.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show once again. This is Omobola Stephen. Also, Live Well Lived by Omobola Stephen. Live Well Lived by Omobola Stephen is a self-improvement and personal development podcast with the occasion of expert and professionals who are adept in the topics of personal development and self-improvement. Live Well Lived by Omobola Stephen has had and recorded incredible guests, right, who have shared profound insights on topics or subjects under personal development. On today's show, I have Paulette Buchanan, who is the author of the book Fighting for Justice. Welcome to the show with me, Paulette Buchanan.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Paulette, for coming to the show. Now, I'm looking forward to your insight. And now, in your book, Fighting for Justice, you describe how multiple vengeances in our government system, right, enable criminals to operate free of consequences and all that goes with it. Now, the question is, how can the government and the big techs, how can they right their wrong?
It really boils down to, we have some good laws on the books in a lot of different states and even in different countries. We have some good laws on the books. It really is a matter of getting the judges to enforce those laws. There are some judges who, they get it, that they're right there, they're enforcing the laws. But unfortunately, there are other judges, it's just a job to them. They go into work, it doesn't matter how badly they perform, they get their paycheck regardless. I think it's so important we try to work with our legislators. There again, some are good, some are not so good, and try to get some laws passed. We have over the past, I would say 10 to 15 years, there have been more and more victims of domestic violence, familial violence, speaking out against how, for example, many abusers abuse the court system, weaponize it by filing ridiculous lawsuits. Oftentimes they do this without an attorney. It's called pro se. Every country that's based on English law, the United States, Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and some other countries, anybody can approach the court with a grievance, with a complaint. In theory, that's a great idea. But unfortunately, you're going to have people who abuse that system, and they're going to file these harassing, defamatory, slanderous, libelous lawsuits against innocent victims. That's where the judges, they have already the right and the duty to screen these lawsuits out. And really, an older generation of judges did just that. They would, and even today, I've talked to a couple of judges, and they say, you know what, I can spot these things a mile away. And I dismiss them right there on the spot. We need more judges like that. But we also need legislators to recognize just how severe a problem it is and really remind the judges, especially those who, again, they just go to work, they get their paycheck, they don't really care. They need to be held accountable. You know, we have a system of balance of power between the executive, who is either the governor of the state or the president of the United States, the legislative, which is, of course, our legislature, both state and federal, and our judiciary, which is, again, both state and federal. There needs to be a balance of power. And right now, too much of the judiciary is out of control. And that really goes over into big tech as well, because they're operating much like monopolies. They're operating in ways that it's the wild, wild west, and laws are not being enforced. Children are being put at risk. Victims are being put at risk. A lot of the stalking that I've encountered comes from all the things that have been on the internet. My brother runs a cult. He gets his cult followers to harass us. All of these things are on record as being illegal, both by state laws and federal laws. We have made some good progress in cleaning up the way the courts operate. And really, we have good stalking laws on the books, but it's really a matter of getting those laws enforced. That's where the problem lies.
Right. Now, talking about lawsuits, right? What impact does meritless harassing lawsuits has on victims? Now, is there a way that we can stop this frivolous act? I'd like you to share personal experience, if any.
Yeah. Fighting a lawsuit, first of all, you can do it what's called pro se or self-represented yourself. It is a difficult task to do. The laws are very complicated. The court procedures are very complicated. For most people without a law degree, you're in like uncharted territory. Unfortunately, a lot of pro se suers, which is what my brother did, he initiated the lawsuits. Oftentimes, these are people who get state aid. They don't have steady employment. They got a lot of free time on their hands, so they can, study the law books and they can study case precedent. That's a real problem because oftentimes they can come across as knowing what they're talking about, but usually they don't. They're just throwing around different things. But what we have seen in, like I said, about 10, 15 years, we have seen more and more legislatures, state laws, and even on the federal level, pass laws that are aimed at curtailing abusive lawsuits, especially those filed by self-represented people who, they don't have an attorney, because many of them are just downright abusive. So thankfully, there have been some laws passed. But yeah, when you get served a lawsuit, you can't ignore it. You have to answer to it. That is the procedure of the court. If you don't answer to it, they'll get what's called a default judgment. And they can shut down your bank account. They can go after your employer for garnishment of wages. I mean, you have to respond to it. And so that's where the fighting comes in. We stuck with it. We could have basically just folded up and just said, oh, sure, let him have whatever he wants to. But no, we fought it. We fought it tooth and nail. It cost us a lot of money. I'm grateful that we've had a good steady income. But for some people, it can quite literally pull them into bankruptcy. The problem is, even though we have judgments and injunctions against him, the judgments for the dollar amounts, it is next to impossible to collect. For one thing, my brother, again, runs a cult. He's completely financially unaccountable. And he's hiding assets, things like that. There may be a possibility he's involved with child porn or has been. We don't know for sure because we would need subpoenas on the 9 emails he has with variations of the word kid sex in it. That's not a good sign that he's doing anything good. And our attorneys have agreed with that. It's just a matter of the judges need to be able to find a way for victims to recover these funds. Now, one way, the state of Florida has done this. We live in Tennessee. We've been trying to get this going, where if someone is suspected of being an abusive litigant, California, Texas, and Florida have these laws where you can say, you know what, Your Honor, I think this guy is an abusive litigant or this woman is an abusive litigant. And we have some proof here, some preliminary evidence to indicate that. Why don't you require them to pay a bond amount that would cover all of the attorney fees if, in fact, this case is going to go forward? And they're doing that in some states where you can ask for bond. Technically, you can ask any court to do that. It's more common in courts, in states rather, where they already have a bond law that states if somebody was a suspected abusive litigant, you can ask for a bond requirement that they basically pay up or shut up. And if they don't pay the bond, their lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice, which means they cannot just turn around and refile that same case. So they're step by step, little by little, there is some progress being made to help victims who are being what's called either vexatiously or abusively sued by an abusive litigant. So there's a little bit of progress, but boy, we sure do need a lot more progress.
Right. Now we get there. I'm not talking about abusive litigants, right? I know that this kind of situation can drive someone insane.
Yeah, it's these are not cases which resolve quickly.
About lawsuits and the stresses that go with all these situations. Now I'm talking about having to drive people insane, right? So are there practical steps to protect and preserve sanity, amidst all this kind of situation while being the target of aggressive death threats, abusive lawsuits?
Yeah, the important thing is to have a close, good network of compassionate people. Some who have been through the same situation, and others, again, they're still supportive, even though they may not have been through that situation. Because, if I can remember, there were those like fleeting few seconds, I thought, oh, why don't I just like kill myself? And you can't give your abuser that. That's what they want. They want you dead. They want you to commit suicide. They want you, we've had death threats from my brother, everything. And those still persist. We still have to be on our guard, but you need a really good network of people to help you out in your lowest times, because it is frustrating. Your attorney can only do so much. But yeah, if you need, like, we had a therapist who helped us through, and she had expertise in dealing with people who were victims of abuse. She herself said, as did our attorneys, the system is very badly broken dealing with these monsters, that they just are not doing enough to protect victims. But you need to remind yourself every day, I know that the truth is on my side. I know I'm going to keep speaking the truth, and I'm going to fight this. And you have to do whatever you have to do to stay in the fight and speak the truth. I remember there was one guy I spoke to. He'd been sued a lot. And there's one thing his attorney told him. There are 3 important things to remember when you're testifying or on the stand. 1, tell the truth. 2, tell the truth. And 3, tell the truth. Always tell the truth. The truth is on your side. And don't forget that. And the judges are looking for that. Most of them. We did have one bad experience with a judge. In the course of all of this, you find bad attorneys. We got 2 attorneys fired from their law firms. We got 1 judge reprimanded. So, it's been a real adventure, and you're going to definitely learn a lot going through this. It's very hard sometimes to find a good attorney. Many of the attorneys that we turned to and asked them, would they please take this case? They said, no, we don't ever take a case with against somebody who's pro se or self-represented, because oftentimes they're very mentally unbalanced, and we don't want to deal with that. And so it's very difficult to find an attorney who's willing to step out there and fight these people who are abusive, these abusers. Fortunately, by and large, we had really good attorneys, but it took some time. We did have a few bad ones, again, that we had to get fired. And then the senior attorneys of the firm who had fired them took over the case. But there's no way to minimize how this is, because it takes over a huge chunk of your life. In addition to that, you then have all of the stalking and the death threats and everything else. And yes, the police have called him up, they've warned him, they've done all of these things, but you know what? He should have been arrested, and he should have been tried for the crimes that he's committed against us. So there again, it goes to the brokenness of both the criminal and the civil courts are just not doing their jobs.
Right. Now, talking about the health system, right? How can they come in? How can we have a compassionate mental health system in this regard? Right now, in this regard, by creating commitment laws, right, and state-monitored private mental health facilities, is it possible? Is it visible?
I think it is, and unfortunately, I think more of the violence that's spilling out. I believe people do have the right to own a gun, but there should be more proper screening. And unfortunately, mental health records are private health records. We have what are called HIPAA laws in the United States. And a lot of other countries have similar types of laws where you cannot access, for example, for a background check. You can't find out that somebody has been diagnosed as being schizophrenic, that they may be having psychopath, delusions and all of this stuff, and that they have a history of violence, because they act those things out. Because oftentimes the courts don't want to deal with that, so they just refer the person to treatment. It can be involuntary, it can be voluntary, but there's no record of it. So anybody who's selling a gun owner, a gun seller rather, they cannot find these records that these people are severely mentally disturbed. That's the problem. The other problem is, for example, back in the early 80s, when they started, the legislatures started doing away with commitment laws, they started shutting down mental health facilities. Many of them were state-run. Very soon after that, I remember in my husband's hometown in Connecticut, in Middletown, Connecticut, there was a mentally disturbed person who had a knife in the middle of broad daylight. There was a street festival going on, and he just attacked out of the blue this little girl and killed her right there on the street. And he was severely mentally disturbed. It's just, there's a political rationale between doing this. And I think it really deals with a lot of out of touch with reality of some of our legislators who tend to be, it's just a reality. They tend to be leaning more toward the left, where everybody has a freedom to do whatever they want to do. And let's, save money by shutting down mental health facilities and doing away with our mental health commitment laws. We need to bring those laws back. And unfortunately, I think it's going to take more and more acts of violence and more deaths. I have to wonder how many more. I mean, as if enough hasn't happened already. We have been advocating that. We've talked with our legislators about that, both state and federal. We need to get strong commitment laws back on the books again. And again, compassionate. We need to also have a compassionate mental health system that is private, like nursing homes and hospitals, but state monitored, like nursing homes and hospitals. That only makes good sense. The expense that has been paid out in jails, housing these mentally disturbed people after they do something, these prisons, that's not saving anybody any money. It certainly doesn't save the victims any money. It's just insane. We have an insane, non-existent mental health system. It's kind of a ruse, really, because, oh, yes, we've got a mental health system. We put them into treatment for, a week or 10 days at most. That's not enough. I liken this to other types of ailments, such as Parkinson's disease and ALS. We don't throw people like that out on the streets. We don't empty out our nursing homes. There were some bad state-run mental hospitals, but I've also spoken to nurses who worked in those. And they said, you know what? We ran actually a lot of compassionate treatment centers in our facilities. To close them all down and claim they're all abusive was just flat out a lie. And again, we have some bad nursing homes, some bad hospitals. What are we going to shut down all of them and throw the baby out with the bathwater? We can't do that. We need a compassionate mental health system in which these people are involuntarily treated. That's going to really solve a lot of the problem with the homeless issues that we have. Here in the United States, I've often wondered, where is the Environmental Protection Agency when you get all these homeless people defecating and urinating and leaving their drug paraphernalia on the streets, and that gets washed out into the ocean? They now have cases where a bunch of dead fish and other, seals and walruses, things like that, marine life, are being affected by all of this untreated sewage being washed down the drains when these people clean the city streets. Because they've got such a homeless problem, these people, again, are defecating and urinating, and all their drug paraphernalia is being washed down into the ocean. It's a huge environmental impact. Where are the environmentalists on this? Where's the EPA on this? So it's just, there's so much hypocrisy and so much politics involved in this. You're dealing with real human beings, and they're affecting a lot of human beings, whether it's with a gun or a knife or a car or their bare hands. The severely mentally disturbed need to be housed somewhere where they cannot harm themselves and other people.
Right. Thank you, Paulette Buchanan, for your insights on today's show. Now, away from that, I want us to talk about cults and religious fraud, right? You mentioned earlier in the discussion that your brother is in a cult, right? So why should anyone be concerned about cults and religious fraud?
Well, I think really it's kind of interconnected with the whole problem with severe mental illness. Anyone who runs a cult, by and large, if you were to do a psychological assay on them, an evaluation, you would find that they have a lot of severe mental health problems. And yet many of these cultists, again, there's a difference between someone who's pathological and someone who's a psychopath. Someone who's pathological, they know the difference between right and wrong. Someone who's a psychopath may really believe that the elephants are speaking to them. I mean, they just don't get it. There is something organically wrong in their brains that they really are hearing voices and delusional and everything else. But a true psychopath can be oftentimes very intelligent, and they know the difference between right and wrong. And they also know how to manipulate people. They know how to read people very well. And that's where these cults come in. It's really a cult leader's primary objective is to ruin people's faith in a good, loving, just God. They want to replace that God with fear of them. They want people to fear them and adore them and emulate them and do everything they say to do. And the way they have to break that down is to detach these people from any faith in a good, loving, just God, which again, these people, these cult leaders can sometimes come across as very caring, very compassionate, all of this, but then they always start to reveal their true colors. They are spiritual abusers. So if you think about anybody who is an abuser, oftentimes they start off with the charm act. And unfortunately, people who are not secure in themselves, who maybe are very ignorant of the ways of psychopaths, that they fall prey to this. No one wakes up, it's common expression, no one wakes up in a given morning and says, I think I'll go join a cult that's going to destroy my whole life. Nobody does that. But instead, these people hit people at their vulnerable spot. It may be going through a divorce, or it may be going through illnesses or any other family problems. It could be anything, being unemployed. They find the vulnerable and they feed off of that, and they promise them the world, and they promise them, oh yes, we care so much about you. You've got to be really careful about that. And that's the problem with, it's not so much it can be a doctrinal thing. They can have some wacky ideas about God and the afterlife and this life and everything else. But it really boils down to their tactics, because whether you find something that's either like Christian related or Jewish related or Eastern religion related, anything, they can take that and they just run with it. And again, they use the internet to prey upon people. They use just face-to-face contact. They're big on college campuses. They've also gone into nursing homes under the code of ministries. And they've gotten elderly people to sign away their wills and their whole life savings and taking away from their children and giving it to this cult. They know exactly what they're doing. But they hit at college students. There are a lot of college students, it's a vulnerable time. You're in a strange place. You're meeting new people. You're kind of, stretching out your limbs to get, independent living and all of that. And of course, it produces a lot of insecurity in a lot of college students. And these cults know how to hit at that. And unfortunately, they oftentimes will get these college students to quit college, quit their whole career goals. There have been people who have been wrapped up into cults for like 10, 15, 20 years, and they literally have thrown away their entire career and even an option of even having a career, because these cults can be so manipulative and holding these people in fear and this us versus them mentality, where they treat other human beings as nothing more than prizes to be won or people to be conquered. This cult mentality, I think, again, the legislatures need to hit at this. There are some countries which have passed anti-cult laws. Some of them are better than other laws. I think there was one in Nigeria that got passed. There's definitely, France has had one. Israel has tried to get them going. Here in the United States, like in the state of Tennessee, the legislature has passed a law a few years ago in which they are prohibiting anybody who gets like a mail order ordination to perform marriages. Because again, these people are total frauds. I definitely think it is a consumer issue. And I think the states need to do a lot more, and the federal government needs to do a lot more with going after these cults. It's not like freedom of religion. It's oftentimes abusing religion to take advantage of people financially and every other way. I liken it oftentimes to the mafia. That's what the mafia does. I grew up in New England, and the mafia had quite a foothold in a lot of different areas. And what they would do is they'd start up bogus businesses And it's like, people kind of knew. It's like, hey, you go in there, it's like, nobody's there. It's like, how does this place stay in business? And it's kind of like that with cults. They set up religion as sort of a front for all of their other illegal activities.
That's right. That's right. We talk about sibling estrangement. Yeah. So now this is very rife. So do you think, or should a person break up with a problematic sibling, right? In this kind of instances, we all know that the problems most times stems from the home, from the family setting, right, down to the outside, right? Because you can't give what you don't have. So when you have sibling estrangement, is it proper for you to, disentangle yourself from a problematic sibling, or are there ways for one to cope?
It really depends upon the level of estrangement. In my case, it was violence. And it was also just intrusion into my private life. I have talked with other people. There are points at which you say, and I've said this for decades, if they don't act like family, I'm not going to acknowledge them as family. As family, we all have obligations to each other. We may not like each other, but we have an obligation to treat each other well. Or again, just have minimal contact just for the sake of peace. But in this case, my brothers have stalked me and my mother, our mother, for decades. My mother has since passed, but she wrote them out of her will. She specifically instructed she did not want them at her funeral because they are so disruptive. Every single one of my brothers has a history of mental health treatment. They all have a history of being arrested, usually, and convicted, usually for violence against women. And the irony is that my parents never were abusive with each other. Now, my grandfather, my father's father, was. Mental illness like this can hit in any generation. As a teacher, I have seen families blown apart by severe mental illness. Some of it's usually coupled with drug use, but not always. And there's nothing you can do about it. It is a genetic crapshoot. You never know. That's the idea of genetics. It's a gamble. You never really know what's going to come out. And unfortunately, my parents hit the genetic jackpot with having 4 sons who, from their very earliest ages, exhibited signs of mental instability, which of course, over time, it got worse. I'm the youngest, and so that's what I was born into. But I do remember my mother speaking about other family members.
Sorry to interrupt you there. You the youngest? Are you the only female child?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, I'm the youngest and the only female. And so I think that was definitely a big part of their resentment of me, that I was kind of like this intruder. I'm the youngest of my oldest brothers, is about 7 years older than me, which as a child it's a big gap, and then being of a different sex, a different gender, that's another big gap. But they were never really protective. They beat up on each other all the time. There was a lot of domestic violence between them as well, as they got into their teen years, especially with my mother and with my father. They really got physically violent with them too. My mother was this very petite woman. She and I were both 5'2", and they shoved her into the wall, things like that, if they didn't get their way. And they would get into fights with fellow students, their peers. They would argue with their teachers. They were just very argumentative and very oppositional. If you say 1 + 1 is 2, they'd want to argue with you. So I think in some situations, estrangement really is, you have to cut ties and you have to tell them. My brothers, each and every one of them, we have said it verbally and we have said it in writing. And we've shown that to the police to say, we want nothing more to do with them. And that is the unfortunate thing. There are a lot of broken families around where there's just no chance of reconciliation. Reconciliation has to be a meeting of minds on both ends. There's no way one single individual can accomplish reconciliation when the other one is determined to basically ruin your life, because out of jealousy, out of whatever. Most of them are total failures in life. They have lost jobs. They've lost relationships. they, like I said, they've been in trouble with the police. They have mental health records. You cannot cure it. You can't save them. My mother and I both tried at various points in time trying to reason with them. And you can't do it. You can't reason with the unreasonable. So it is a fact that you do have to make that choice to say, I've done everything I possibly can do. I cannot do any more. To try to do any more is actually enabling them, or it's minimizing the damage that they've done. They have to own it. They have to own the full circumstances. And unfortunately, the stalking has continued and everything else, even though we've told them. The police have warned my brothers left and right to stay away from me, stay away from my employers, stay away from my husband's employers. They've harassed them. They've harassed our neighbors. I mean, this is not your usual, I don't agree with this person. This is stalking. This is deliberate harassment. And that's where it really crosses the line. It is abuse. It's a form of abuse. The death threats, everything.
Wow. That's a really big issue, Paulette. Really big issue.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it's a common issue. And that's where, again, you need to find your support system. I wake up every day, and there are times, I'll have a bad dream, or I'll just wake up and it's like, you just want to find a cave and crawl into it. And you can't do that because that's what they want. You cannot give them that. You have to nurture your spirit. You have to nurture your mind, and you have to find purpose in life too. As I said, I've been a teacher, but I've done a lot of volunteer work as well. And you reach outside of yourself. I think one of the best healing things you can do is simply get involved in life. Talking to your neighbors, getting involved in volunteer work, helping other people out. And in your jobs, try to find a very fulfilling job, and make sure that you are actually being of help to people. I'm a person who prays every day, and it's like, okay, open up opportunities for me so that I can help other people, because I know what it's like to need help. And it's like, okay, where do I look? What do I do? Where do I go? And so I've always been that way. From my earliest years, I don't remember any other time when I didn't want to become a teacher. I've always enjoyed that whole learning experience and helping others, my classmates, and then later on, of course, my students. And that's my personality. Even in my volunteer position, I'm always there trying to give assistance, find resources for people, community resources. So that's, what I enjoy doing that. And then that's just it. People need to get out of themselves. I have a friend, unfortunately, she's become, it's kind of like what they call the paralysis of analysis. And that's all she does. She just sits there and analyzes herself. And it's like, there's a whole world out there. Yes, there's a lot of bad, but you know what? There's a lot of good too. I think being grateful, and her counseling that she's told me, she said, she hit upon this wonderful idea that her counselor said is to be grateful. It's like, yeah, don't take for granted being grateful. You've got to find something to be grateful for. There are some good things, and you've got to try to be that encouragement to yourself.
Reaching out to people. Involved in volunteer work, yes. The ways you can be grateful for what you have is by showing the world that you're grateful.
Yes.
If you don't show it to the world that you're grateful, how would they appreciate, or how would they understand and value the importance of being grateful? So I think that what we have, we need to extend it to those who are there, because there are people out there who really need what we want. And I basically think that is what is happening to you right now. I believe that what happened to you is not an accident. I believe that it is intentional, right? You're like this moment, you're sharing your experiences because of some other people out there. Someone out there needs this information that you're sharing. So I think that in one way or the other, we are instruments of change and for change. And that is what you're doing, right? So I really appreciate your time on the show and for sharing your professional expertise on today's show, accompanied by your personal experience. Paulette, do you have any projects you have in the pipeline?
I'm so grateful of your work that you're doing in helping people and giving them an opportunity to listen to other people's stories. And again, we're here to try to encourage each other. And I think I really appreciate your work in doing that. And for having me on, people can get on Amazon and they can find my book, Fighting for Justice, Religious Fraud, Mental Illness, and the Collapse of Law and Order. And I give solutions. I'm a very solution-minded person, so I give solutions in my book. Some of them may be harder to achieve than others, but I think we all have a choice in how we are going to respond to this in a positive way. And so I encourage people to do that. And also encourage people to write their own stories, whether it's like a blog online or whatever, because we all need to have that encouragement. And you have a story to tell. And you have value and you have worth, and we need to hear from you. So speak up.
That's right. That's right. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you for that inspiration and motivation, Paulette. Right. Now, we'd like to have your social media handles on your website.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that last part.
My audience would like to have your social media handles on your website to reach out.
Oh, right. Yes. I do have my website, stopabusivelawsuits.com, stopreligiousfrauds.com, and of course, my book, fightingforjusticebook.com. I am on LinkedIn and on Goodreads, but I have to admit, I hardly ever get on there. I do upon occasion. But I do have to be careful about my social media presence because of, again, my brother. That's the primary way that he stalks and harasses people, pretends to be like multiple different people and everything. So I do have to be careful about that.
I quite understand.
Yeah.
I understand. Wish you all the best of luck in your future endeavors, Paulette Buchanan.
Well, thank you. The same for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you once again for being a guest on today's show. All right.
You.
If you'd like to catch up with any episodes of Live Well Lit by Omobola Stephen, you can check online on visit amobolastephen.online, or you can check cross-motion platforms online, Live Well Lit by Omobola Stephen, right? And now, if you'd like to be a guest on the show, right, you can mail me at omobolastephen.o at outlook.com. I'll be looking forward to your mail till I come your way. Be good. Bye for now.
Are we still recording?
This is The Backstory with Omobola Stephen. It's a balanced, objective, unbiased and disruptive conversation on government and politics. We shine more light on what has not worked and what would make it work. And now, to the finest, personable and engaging host extraordinaire, Omobola Stephen. Tune in.